Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third Dóchas webinar of 2022. My name is Christine, and I'm on the Mental Health and Wellbeing Working Group of the Irish Support Agency. So welcome all. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the lands we're meeting on. We stand on the lands of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and all those emerging, for they hold the memories, traditions, and cultures of these lands and waters. We remember that these lands are, were, and always will be Aboriginal land. Tonight, we'll be examining self-esteem and self-confidence as a means of rebuilding ourselves over a couple of difficult years we all have had the last few years. One thing the pandemic has given us all is a time for inner reflection. And through this exploration work, many of us have been left asking questions. Is this who I am? What do people really think of me? Low self-esteem or self-confidence can have a high impact on our day-to-day lives. So tonight we want to examine why we might be feeling low about ourselves and how we can get back into liking ourselves and how we live our lives. If anyone has any questions at any stage, please pop them into our chat box, and I'm sure to ask our amazing hosts, or guests. I'm the host. So tonight, we are very lucky to be joined again with two amazing guests who are Johnny Klusch and Fionnuala Doherty. Johnny is originally from County Cavan in Ireland and has lived in Sydney for 3 years. He's a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, a master's in nutrition, and a master's in psychology. He's been a busy lad. He currently works as a personal trainer and is a registered psychologist and associate nutritionist. He combines all of these areas of his education and expertise to improve people's health and quality of life. He's also a member of the Irish Support Agency Mental Health Group. He's a member of the Michael Cusack's GAA Health and Wellbeing Committee, and he's recently set up a men's mental health group called How's the Head. Michael, I really don't even know how you've used time to do anything in your spare time. We also have Fionnuala, who is a qualified life coach, an MSc therapist, and a yoga teacher. She supports expat women to support their worthiness and take action onto their dreams. Using her signature framework, the Infinnite method, she supports these women to create the life they dreamed of when they first moved away from home. She has supported many women to uncover the career of their dreams while sold friends and community and to truly own their limited potential. Welcome to the both of you. I can't believe we are so lucky that we have two of you joining us here tonight. So obviously tonight is a really, really important subject, which I think both of you can share a great lot of light on. The first question we have, which is open to the two of you, is what is self-esteem?
So I'll let Fionnuala go first if you want, and then I can follow up if you want.
Sure. Self-esteem is how we really value and appreciate ourselves, and it's often related to how we think and the way that we speak to ourselves. So it's a very internal experience. And so it runs on a spectrum and is very impacted by experiences that we have. So some days our self-esteem might feel quite good. And then if we have an experience that impacts our self-esteem, sometimes that can make us feel a little more negatively about ourselves. So it's not static, and it's something that shifts and changes based on how we experience life. That's how I see self-esteem.
Yeah. So I suppose for me, I'll come at it from more from the psychological perspective, from what I've learned about it. So self-esteem has been quite the hot topic now in psychology for decades, and research into it is still ongoing. So in psychology, the term self-esteem is used to describe a person's overall subjective sense of personal worth or value. So in other words, like self-esteem could be defined as how much you like yourself regardless of circumstance. So it can have important impacts on your motivation, your decisions, your relationships, your emotional health, and your overall well-being. As Fionnuala pointed out there as well, it does run on a spectrum, and it can be divided into two main parts. either low self-esteem or unhealthy variants or levels of self-esteem, and high self-esteem, which is seen as more healthier version of self-esteem. So that's just from the literature, what is kind of based around it, but it's still ongoing at the minute.
Thanks, guys. I suppose one thing we often see in like social media, day-to-day lives, is them like buzzwords, but what is the actual difference between self-esteem, self-worth, and self-confidence?
So I suppose even from my perspective, I just kind of jumped in there for yeah, there's a lot of words that are used interchangeably with self-esteem, as you mentioned, the likes of self-worth, self-confidence, self-compassion, but they're all very different constructs themselves, and they all have important differences. So if we think of self-esteem as the way we think, feel, and believe in ourselves, self-worth is more of a global recognition of how we value ourselves as human beings and that we're worthy of love, essentially. Self-confidence is a little bit different to self-esteem as well, because self-confidence is more about your overall trust in yourself and your ability to deal with, negative challenges or solve problems. So self-confidence is definitely more based on external measures of success as opposed to internal measures of self-worth. So a prime example would be a person could have high levels of self-confidence in a particular domain in their life, such as their work, or if someone is big into sport, they might be very self-confident in, being a good player, but they might have low levels of self-esteem or still self-worth. So it's only one facet of self-esteem, if that makes sense. Fionnuala, what do you reckon?
Yeah, that all is very true. And one thing that I would add to what you shared around self-confidence is that self-confidence is something that we can build with experience. So often when we try something for the first time, we might not feel very confident at it. And so it's something that gets built with experience, just like you said, which is kind of different from our sense of self-worth and our sense of self-esteem. Confidence is something that we can build as we learn more about something. And often we want to feel confident in something before we do it, but it's very difficult to have that. So yeah, that's where I would kind of see the difference.
Thanks, guys. I suppose, as I mentioned earlier on, Johnny, you have a master of nearly every study. You must have spent a lot of time in the library. Can you tell us a bit about your thesis?
Yep. So my thesis, you might have to bear with me because it's a little bit complicated. So I'll do my best to try and simplify it as best as possible. So the thesis, I was trying to research the relationship between spontaneous self-affirmations, stress, self-esteem, habitual positive self-thoughts, self-integrity amongst a student population. So to give a bit of background or context to this, people are exposed to many psychological threats on a daily basis. So these can include things like work stress, relationship issues, financial concerns, or even stigmatization, for example. There's a theory known as Self-Affirmation Theory, which suggests that people are strongly motivated to maintain a positive perception of themselves. And when they encounter a threat, such as an insult, for example, they'll either become defensive or they'll use these things called self-affirmations to try and neutralize this threat to themselves. So I was looking more into the component of the self-affirmations as opposed to the defensive side of it. So what is a self-affirmation? So a self-affirmation is a statement, thought, or an act that a person can do that affirms their own self-worth. So self-affirmation has been shown to improve self-esteem, they can decrease stress, they can increase well-being, and they can also promote health behavior changes. The majority of the research, though, based on these self-affirmations has been based on people who've been instructed on how to use these self-affirmations. However, my thesis was based around spontaneous self-affirmations, which describes a person's ability to naturally self-affirm without any instructions. So that is an important difference because I suppose when we talk about the results now of the thesis, it just highlights that we can actually learn self-affirmations as opposed to just relying on them. And in future presence, or in future terms, should I say, you might then be able to spontaneously self-affirm. So with the findings, contrary to a lot of the research out there, what I found was that spontaneous self-affirmations didn't actually predict student stress. And there were a number of potential reasons why this could have been. So we boil it down to potential elevated defensive mechanisms and negative emotional states during the COVID-19 pandemic. So these states can serve as a protective mechanism for, I suppose, psychological distress of low controllability. So obviously a pandemic, you can't really have much control over that. So they can actually serve a beneficial purpose as well. Interestingly, though, we did find that students with higher self-esteem and habitual positive self-thoughts were better at reducing stress in comparison to those with low self-esteem. So I suppose the key takeaway from that was that by using instructed forms of self-affirmations, not the spontaneous self-affirmations that I was studying, you can improve a person's self-esteem and tolerance to daily stressors, which is a very good thing because it just shows that we can actually teach people how to self-affirm, and that in itself can be used as a psychological mechanism for alleviating psychological distress. I really hope that came across. Try to simplify that as much as possible, trust me.
No, Johnny, thanks very, very much for that. Sounds like it was a really interesting thesis and amazing findings, so well done. I suppose there, when you're talking about your students, and I suppose this is actually a question to both of you, have you seen any significant differences or difference at all between males and females when it comes to self-esteem? I'm happy for either of you to take that question first.
I don't know if there was a finding in your research, Johnny, but research does show that men tend to have higher self-esteem than women do. And I primarily work with women, so I can only really speak to how I see self-esteem show up in terms of issues which are gender specific to women. So one thing that I see very, very often with the clients that I work with is how the ideals for women in society impacts their self-esteem. And one of the really big ones is body image. It is an experience that so many women have that I work with because, you know, now we have social media more than we have ever had before. And so we are constantly being witness to all of the things online and the ideas that we have around body image. And so one of the stories that we work through together is coming to a space of acceptance around their body and also separating their sense of worth and sense of self-esteem away from what their body looks like. And so that is something that I see again and again for women. And I also know that that is becoming more of an issue for men as well. It's definitely not something that only women experience, but I feel like it's almost like a universal experience of the women that I work with. It's very rare that I work with a woman who has low self-esteem, who doesn't have some of that show up in her relationship to her body. And another thing that, on reflection of this question, that really came to mind for me was how connected our ability to be authoritative is in regards to our self-esteem and how that shows up. So when we are very confident in who we are, when we've got good self-esteem, when we've got good self-worth, we are much more equipped to set boundaries for ourselves, and we're much more equipped to feel that sense of being able to be authoritative within what we believe is right and wrong. And often what I witness in the women that I work with is that that can be really challenging, particularly whenever they're in a male dominated organization, say, or if they're in a place that has that culture of patriarchy, because women are almost praised for perfectionism, for being subservient, and for all of those different qualities. And so when we're working to get to a space where they really want to challenge that and they want to speak up and have boundaries and work and things like that, I feel like there's an extra layer of challenge for the women that I work with, because those qualities are almost valued in the workspace. So those are the things that I definitely witness being gender specific to the women that I work with.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree with you there. I just wanted to jump in before you, Johnny. I was
you work with
agreeing with Fionnuala. Like, I work with a lot of teenagers, and I do see it is a lot of women, but I would agree that like men, I'm sure Johnny will expand on it, but I've working with one young male, and I'll never forget when I brought him shopping first. He picked up a t-shirt and it was like a size extra small, and I was like, "Hon, that's too small for you." But he's a really tall man, and I was like, "No, you'd be a size like medium or large." And he's like, "I can't put a large on me." He was just like, and he just was associating the L on the label like as just, and it really brought him down. And I was just like, oh, and like my words hurt him, and I was like, oh, I actually just meant you were really tall. Like, I was like, he's a good 2 foot taller than me. He's nearly 7 foot. So I was like, you are quite tall. So like the other one will be short on you. But yeah, it's really interesting. And like he just was comparing himself to what he's seen on Instagram that morning. He was like, I don't look like that. But I'm sure, Johnny, you can expand more on like what the differences are for men.
Yeah, well, I know from the research, and Fionnuala has obviously touched on this as well, that yes, men tend to have higher self-esteem than women, or so it seems anyway. But it's unclear as to why there is this gender difference, and it's still being tested at the minute. There's a number of theories as to why there might be gender differences in self-esteem. They boil down to gender roles, so gender-specific roles, biological differences as well, environmental factors, and potentially even personality traits. So I suppose even from my own perspective as a personal trainer, I work both with males and females, and it would appear that men have a tendency to have higher self-esteem and confidence, but I need to, I suppose, ensure people that I've never actually measured it, so I can't be 100% sure. But I suppose it takes men a lot longer to actually open up and discuss, their self-worth or their self-confidence, for example. So I find that obviously working with females, once you've built up enough rapport, it's a lot easier for them to actually express their feelings of low self-confidence, for example, or low self-esteem. Now, they have a tendency to do that a little bit quicker than the males that I work with. Eventually, men might decide to open up to me. And once again, it's always at their own discretion. But once they do, and once there's enough rapport built and they decide to open up, it's extremely prevalent that body image and societal pressures have a big part to play in it, just like Fionnuala had said there as well. So I 100% agree with you in the sense that, yes, it can be very, very tricky to navigate the waters. I think in this day and age, I think you run the line of actually offending someone, by even just saying, as you say, Christine, about a large t-shirt, for example. So it just goes to show that no one really gets away scot-free. Men and females both suffer from self-esteem issues, but it's predominantly shown that men appear to have higher self-esteem. But as I say, it's still up for debate at the minute as well.
Yeah, thank you both for that. What is my next question? So my next question is, can you tell me how low self-esteem might manifest itself in our everyday lives?
Want me to go first?
Peter?
So low self-esteem, as I shared previously, self-esteem is a very internal experience. And so sometimes it can be easy to kind of recognize that low self-esteem is impacting your life, sometimes not so much. So self-esteem in terms of day-to-day life can really impact you in terms of how you're thinking and how you're feeling about yourself. And often when you're having negative thoughts, you're also feeling not so great inside. Other ways that it can really impact you is how you show up for relationships. So often whenever we have low self-esteem, we tend to be in relationships that we put up with behaviors that we possibly wouldn't put up with if we had better self-esteem and we were able to attract people who, really valued us as a person. So it can show up in terms of how we show up in relationship to others. It can also show up in terms of avoidance. So when we have low self-esteem, we might avoid doing particular tasks or being in particular social situations because of those thoughts that are spiraling in our heads. But also the opposite can be really true. So sometimes whenever somebody is struggling with low self-worth or low self-esteem, they might be constantly trying to prove themselves to other people. So that trait of perfectionism might really show up, where they go above and beyond in everything that they do because they really want to prove that they're good enough. Or in terms of, really wanting to please other people so that other people will value and appreciate them. And that's where they get their sense of self-esteem from. So there's a whole host of different ways that it can show up, and no two people are exactly the same, particularly because it is such an internal experience.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, Fionnuala, you've pretty much touched on the majority of them. I would kind of add to it, though, that there is a tendency, I suppose, for people with low self-esteem, should I say, they usually find it very hard to set boundaries, and they can have a lot of problems within their relationships as well, mainly because they find it very difficult to actually express their own particular needs, or maybe they don't even understand them themselves. This in turn can obviously have a massive effect on just everyday life and quality of life as well. So being able to set your boundaries is a very important part of, I suppose, understanding yourself and being able to say no for particular things. And that ties back into what you'd said there, Fionnuala, about people pleasing. A lot of people, will get their external validation from external sources, such as people pleasing. They might look for confidence externally, by trying to potentially dress a particular way, or seeking out and hanging around relationships that, I suppose, give them that self-confidence. But all in all, they're not very happy internally as well. And obviously this goes against, I suppose, what healthy self-esteem looks like, which could be, having a positive outlook on life and understanding your strengths and weaknesses and actually accepting them for what they are. So yeah, it's interesting now. It's very interesting. It does run on a scale. I suppose I should also mention as well that having excessively high levels of self-esteem can also be detrimental as well. And that can tie into the narcissistic traits as well, although they are two separate constructs. So for example, someone with overly high self-esteem might be overly confident in a particular, facet of their life, but they mightn't actually be competent in it. And they might avoid certain situations as well because they believe themselves to be superior, or they've got perfectionist beliefs. So they'll actually avoid those particular situations so that they don't actually receive any criticism. So they find it very hard to receive criticism. So it's always trying to find that balance and that sweet spot between low self-esteem and excessively high self-esteem. And as Fionnuala had mentioned as well, no two persons are the same. So you need to figure out what is best for you and work on that for yourself.
Thanks, guys. So I actually have a question that just came in through the chat there. So it's actually, how do you start to gently set boundaries at work if you are a people pleaser, which is actually a really interesting one. So any tips from either of you there?
Yeah, absolutely. So often whenever we think about setting boundaries, we can connect setting boundaries with confrontation. And when we're a people pleaser, we can really want to run away from those two things being connected. And so one of the things that really supports us to start to set boundaries is to separate those two things apart, and to know that setting boundaries doesn't always have to be controversial. And so one of the things that I love to talk to my clients about is using I language, and to get really clear on what it is that you actually want and why you want it, so that that's the space that you come from when it comes to setting boundaries. And if you can think about how that will also support the people that you work with. So say, for example, you're setting a boundary around the time that you take in your day for yourself. If you think about how that actually allows you to show up as a better employee, so you can also communicate those things so that it kind of feels like a two-way street or a win for both people. Because often whenever we're setting boundaries, we want to be really careful that we don't put the other person in that place where they start to get defensive. And that's when we get the outcome that we want. So you might just invite yourself to think about what it is that you want, why you want it, and how it might also benefit the person that you're setting that boundary with, and start from there.
Amazing, thanks. Johnny?
Yeah, and I would touch on that as well. Just, I think the first point is obviously trying to establish what it is that you actually want yourself, and being confident and authoritative within that decision, obviously, the first part is trying to figure that out. And then secondly is, I think, as Fionnuala touched on there, is realizing that, setting boundaries doesn't necessarily always lead to confrontation as well. And it's actually quite the opposite. People tend to actually respect you a lot more when you do have set boundaries, because they realize, okay, that you have a bit more autonomy over your own self-decisions, and you have a bit more respect for yourself as well. And people actually respect that a lot more as well, believe it or not. So
thanks, guys. I think both of them were great tips, and I think our person that asked the question also agrees with you, so thank you for that. Suppose on tips, is there tools, self-care strategies, and when do you know when to ask for help?
Yeah, so we were actually just talking about this whenever we came on the call, is the fact that, every one of us have a journey with our self-esteem and our own self-worth to some extent. And so I think that a big part of starting to look at this concept for yourself is actually starting with that space of acceptance, of being okay with the fact that it's a journey that you can reflect on and that you can work through. Because often the emotion that is underlying self-esteem and self-worth is shame. And so when it comes to actually addressing the issue, we can kind of become, we can get into that energy of shame, and it can make it feel really difficult to acknowledge it and to accept it, and to therefore be able to work through it. And once we get to that stage of acceptance, the next part of working through it is being able to find awareness. So once we get to a space where we accept that self-worth is something that we want to work on, then we have to bring awareness to what are these thoughts, what are these feelings that are holding me back in everyday life, and when and how do they show up? Because as we've spoke about on this call, everybody's experience is so different. And often the stories that we tell ourselves are very different as well. And they can be related to things that happened to us years ago, like a teacher who said a certain thing to us, and now that pattern continues to show up in day-to-day life. And there's so many strategies that will allow us to build that sense of awareness. One that is really powerful is meditation, because meditation teaches us to separate ourselves from our thoughts and to become more aware of what's happening in our mind. Even things like journaling. And part of this, it's really supportive to have an external lens that will help you to uncover those stories, because they develop at such a young age that often it can be really, really difficult for us to become aware of them on our own. And so having that external lens just allows us to become witness to what our own stories are, because then we start to realize that, oh, maybe this belief or this thought that I'm having isn't 100% true. It's actually just a story. And there are really practical things that we can do as well to support our sense of self-esteem and self-worth, because thoughts create beliefs, and it also creates our behaviors, because when we think a certain way, we believe a certain thing, and then we'll behave in a certain way. So we can, and that's a circle, so we can, attack is the wrong word, but we can you know what I mean? We can kind of come at that circle from different lenses or different areas. So even being in action around the behaviors that will support you with your self-esteem. So if, for example, there's something that you avoid because you tell yourself that you're not good enough to do it, like go to a dance class or go to a singing lesson because you really enjoy singing, doing those things will help you to build that sense of self-esteem because you're investing in yourself. Or even things like, you know, when we have low self-esteem, we can often not have great self-care practices. So it might even be, you know, starting to invest in yourself in terms of how you dress yourself in the morning, and doing that just simply because it makes you feel good and it helps you with your own sense of self-esteem because you're actually looking after yourself during the day. So there's a whole multitude of different ways that we can address self-esteem, and it's definitely something that we can work on and build and improve on with support.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would. I'd also agree with most of the points there. Or sorry, not most. All of the points there that Fionnuala's mentioned. I suppose when I would be giving out tips with self-esteem, I'd normally divide them both into psychological tips and potentially physical tips. So from a psychological perspective, as Fionnuala already alluded to, definitely becoming aware of the negative thought patterns is probably the most important step into actually helping yourself, you know, get better self-esteem. So learning to identify those distorted thoughts that might be impacting your self-worth is probably the most important part. The second part of that then is obviously challenging these negative thoughts. So you need to understand why these thoughts are there in the first place. So it can be often related to things that have happened in the past, childhood traumas, or, you know, as Fionnuala said, something that maybe your teacher said. So becoming aware of that and then being able to counteract it with more realistic and positive thoughts is probably the second part. The third part then would be actually relating it back to my thesis, which is using self-affirmations or positive self-affirmations to actually help bolster your self-esteem, because they are scientifically proven as well. So the best way to do this is to reflect and recite your best qualities. So think about your strengths, think about your values, think about good positive relationships that you have in your life. And just like a muscle, just like any sort of physical exercise, the more you use it, the better you get. So you actually end up changing your thinking patterns and you actually develop a better behavior as well. And then the last one for the psychological perspective, I would recommend looking into using self-compassion. So self-compassion is where you forgive yourself for past mistakes and you're kind and you accept yourself for who you are. That is also a big part in, I suppose, the psychological component of helping with self-esteem. Then from the physical component, then definitely look into doing some sort of physical activity. So engaging in any exercise, for example, as Fionnuala had mentioned, yoga, meditation, even resistance or cardiovascular exercise is quite good. These have usually a tendency to improve your perceptions of your self-image, you know, your self-efficacy, so how competent, how good you are at a particular task, and obviously your physical appearance as well. So if you're unsure how to do any of these particular things, you could always hire a coach, you know. As Fionnuala had already said there, you know, getting an external set of eyes can always help you become more confident and competent within a particular physical activity that you're engaging in. And then the last one, which is often overlooked, is having a healthy diet or eating a balanced diet. So diet can directly affect not only your health, but how you feel and your mood overall. So simple things, you know, and the basics do work. Sticking to your 5 to 6 portions of fruit and veg a day, eating complex carbohydrates such as whole grain breads and pastas, getting in some healthy fats, and also looking into getting lean protein sources into your diet as well. So yeah, those are kind of just two different components or looking at it, but as I say, combining a few of them as well would be quite beneficial. What I would say as well is obviously those tools and tips are very useful, but there might be times where you might need to seek external help. So self-esteem in itself can actually contribute to depression and anxiety as well, if not actually be a symptom of it. So if you're feeling, maybe if you've tried a lot of these tools and you're still feelings, so you still got feelings of low self-esteem, and they're constantly lingering for long periods of time, it's probably a good idea to speak to your doctor or potentially reach out to a therapist to discuss potential maybe psychotherapy or medications, or even combining both as well. So
yeah, totally agree with both of you there. I suppose something that has come up from a few of your answers, guys, is to do with the past. Do you think low self-esteem is could it be to do that and with how we've been brought up, growing up? I don't know, what's your feels on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It can definitely be a result of our childhood and our relationship with our parents and school teachers and our experiences growing up. Even things like our academic success as a child and as a teenager can really impact our self-esteem, particularly if we're not achieving in the ways that society says that we should achieve. All those things can impact how we view ourselves and our own sense of self-esteem. So absolutely, yeah, childhood can definitely impact our self-esteem.
I think we all remember the leaving cert, the dreads.
Yeah. It's so funny how often, one teacher's comment will come up in a session that happened years and years ago. Our brains as children just seep in everything.
Oh, soak it all in. Johnny, have you any comments on that?
Yeah. I suppose there's, just from the research itself on self-esteem, and obviously it's still ongoing as well, but there's a number of factors that might actually contribute to, why people might have low self-esteem. So that could include anything like age, genetics, your personality, potential thought patterns, your overall health, socioeconomic status, as well as comparing yourself to others, so comparisons. But what appears to be the most prevalent or important factor that forms the basis of self-esteem is actually life experiences. So that's where obviously the childhood traumas and stuff like that might come into play. So for example, for people who might consistently receive critical or negative assessments from family members, friends, teachers, whoever it is, they'll more than likely experience low levels of self-esteem. So if you compare that to people who've been exposed or have experiences where they're receiving complete support and acceptance for who they actually are from their friends and families and members of society, they tend to generally have healthier forms of self-esteem as well. So the good news is obviously that self-esteem isn't actually fixed, and it is something that can be worked upon. But I suppose going back to the points that we made just previously is making sure that you are aware of yourself and understanding that you might fall into the category of low self-esteem is an important step in actually trying to help yourself. So
thank you. I had a question come in as well, which is, Johnny, can you give us an example of a self-affirmation?
Sure. So as I said, self-affirmations would be, they're actually quite personal. So whenever you're trying to teach someone how to do a self-affirmation, every self-affirmation would be very different. So what you would normally tend to do is you would reflect on your strengths, your values, and your relationships. So a prime example would be if you're a competent swimmer, for example, affirming to yourself and reciting to yourself that you are a really good swimmer, is a positive self-affirmation. If you are, let's just say you're an honest person, reflecting on that and reciting that to yourself, I am an honest person, that is a form of a self-affirmation as well. The beauty about self-affirmations is that you can use them in instances of psychological distress, regardless of whether they're related or not. So what I mean by that is, if you, let's just say, get a bad grade in a maths test, recalling on a positive relationship is still enough to actually mitigate the effects or the negative effects of having received a bad grade. So it doesn't have to be exclusively related to the stressor, should I say. But as I say, yeah, so reflecting on your personal values, your strengths, and your relationships are usually the main three.
Amazing, thanks. I think I also love about affirmations is you can use them on the go. They don't need to be something that you carry around with you. Like you can say it in your head, like you can say it on the train, you can say it in walks. I think it's like a really good thing. We often use it with some of our young people. Another great question that came in open to either of you is any tips on how you view failures and how do you learn to accept them?
Do you want to go ahead, Fionnuala?
Can you repeat it again?
So like is there any tips on how you view a failure and how you learn to accept them?
Yeah, so that is often where we start to witness our self-worth or self-esteem stories come up, because when we have that ability to have resilience, that's often whenever we have a stronger sense of self-esteem. And so when we have one failure, we don't make it about us. So we don't view that failure as I'm a really bad person or this means something about me. And we're able to just simply view it as a learning experience, as something that we can learn from and move on from, because, you know, failure is part of life and it's something that we all experience. And so if you can view it as that's just something that has taught me something, that's just something that has allowed me to learn something new or that I can try again, and to build that sense of resilience for yourself instead of making it mean something about you as a person. I hope that helps and I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I like that. Johnny, have you any tips?
Yeah, I suppose just trying to understand what do you mean by failure is a big part in it as well. Like I'm not too sure what the specific example is, but obviously trying to dissociate yourself from that particular event, and acknowledging that it has happened, but it doesn't determine your self-worth is a massive part, and obviously trying to maintain a stable level of self-esteem. But yeah, I think, as I say, dissociating that in itself is a big part of it, but also just reiterating the fact that, you are not the failure just because something has failed, and viewing it as a way of learning, as Fionnuala had already pointed out, is probably a better method of actually looking at it. So it's not something that has failed, it's something that hasn't worked. So fail, is an acronym from first attempt in learning. So if you can look at it from that perspective, and say that, okay, this has happened. Now I know that whatever I do this particular way doesn't actually work for the outcome that I want, then you can go a different direction. So it's always a bi-directional feedback. So I think that's probably one of the ways that you could do it. And that ties nicely into what Fionnuala was saying as well. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's actually one of the phrases a lot of my young people use is everything happens for a blessing or a lesson. And I couldn't agree more with them, but they'll always find a lesson or like a blessing out of each thing. And I think it's a great way to go, because I think we can always learn from something. If there's one thing we could do or say to ourselves this evening to self-care, what would it be?
That's a very good question.
Fionnuala,
do you want to go first?
So what comes up for me is there's a very simple affirmation that I really, really love, and it is, I am worthy because I am, full stop. And it's something that when we say it to ourselves, it can really shift how we feel, because often our self-worth, as we have spoke about this evening, is based on achievements. It's based on how life is going. It's based on, whether we're viewing ourselves as being or as things of having failed, or whether they're going really well for us. So I really love that affirmation, something I use myself and something that I often share with clients.
Yeah, that's a really good question now. I would say something similar in terms, I don't have a specific self-affirmation now, but I think definitely going back and reflecting on what your strengths are, you know, what you think are your best abilities, you know, and you can have a whole list of them, put them down on paper, you know, and just utilize maybe one that stands out the most to you, and then use that whenever you're faced with any sort of psychological distress. As I say, every self-affirmation will be different for every person because they are quite individualized, and they have to be. I mean, if Fionnuala starts talking about her self-affirmations that work for her, they might necessarily work for me because they're not personalized. So, as I say, take time to write down your personal affirmations, write down what your strengths are, what your values are, what your good relationships are. Those are the foundations for what your self-affirmations should be. And then, as I say, write as many of them down as you want, and then select maybe one or two. A good thing to do would be to write it down on a sticky note, put it on your bathroom mirror, and then recite it while you're brushing your teeth. So there's one way that people have done it in the past, and it seems to work for them very nicely.
A whiteboard marker also works on your bathroom mirrors.
Even better. You don't have the sticky notes, yes.
You don't even have to pick up the sticky notes. I'm just wondering, does anyone else in our audience have any questions for our amazing guests tonight? Also, just to note that Una has popped in a few numbers into the group chat there for anyone to access if you have found tonight's topics where you want to discuss it. I'll give it another second. But I do think, thank you to both Fionnuala and Johnny for tonight. You've both been amazing guests to have on. We do hope that everyone in this audience has got something from tonight's session, and we do hope to see you again at our next Dóchas event, which is the first Monday of every month. Remember, all of these Dóchas sessions will be recorded, and they are popped up onto our YouTube page and our Irish Support Agency page. I think that is it. I don't see any questions coming in. So on behalf of myself and the Irish Support Agency, God bless and good night. Thank you.